The Prime Minister insisted he'd been thinking about it for 3 years, that it was his decision based on his assessment. But 2 days before Sir Keir Starmer meets President Trump in the White House, he announced today he is increasing Britain's defence spending. It is just what the President wanted to hear. And that's only the beginning of the controversy. The money for defence is coming out of the overseas aid budget. That is certainly not what charities wanted to hear. Tonight they are furious with the numbers, as are many MPs. Sir Keir says defence spending will rise to 2.5% of national income in 2 years' time, funded by a cut in foreign aid to 0.3%. Not what you'd expect from a Labour Prime Minister who promised the opposite in his manifesto. But the world's changed just a little bit since then.
It is an extraordinary change of direction. The Labour government, is cutting Britain's overseas aid budget by 40% and putting that money into defence. The Prime Minister told Parliament it was a response to the threat from Russia.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
He said taking the money from the aid budget had been a reluctant decision.
I want to be clear to the House. That is not an announcement I am happy to make. But at times like this, the defence and security of the British people must always come first.
The Conservatives had been calling for an increase in defence spending.
National interest should always come first. So I'm very pleased to hear the Prime Minister announce that increase to 2.5% by 2027. All of us on this side of the House welcome that. We've all wanted to see more spending on defence.
Today's announcement means £6 billion worth of spending moving from the aid budget to the defence budget. This year, the UK is expected to spend £66 billion on defence. The new money, plus already planned increases, will push that to nearly £80 billion in 2027. And the longer-term promise to get from 2.5 to 3% of GDP by the end of the next Parliament could mean serious cuts to other budgets. The massive transfer of cash from aid to defence has infuriated charities and angered many Labour MPs. What has changed is the approach of a new US president who wants the rest of NATO to spend a lot more.
NATO should be at 5%, not at 2%. 2% is ridiculous.
The Prime Minister will meet Donald Trump this week, and I asked him if that had determined the timing of this.
You wouldn't be making this announcement today if you weren't going to see Donald Trump on Thursday, would you?
Of course, the discussions about talks between the parties, a possible peace, what that might mean for European security, the role the UK would have to play in that, has brought our response into sharp focus. That yes, I have pushed our system to move this date forward.
Donald Trump's reshaping of American foreign policy is so dramatic and so far-reaching that it is even affecting how the government here spends our money. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Downing Street.
Well, if you want to understand the reaction to today's news, much of the fury lies within the precise figures. The share of the UK economy spent on defence has been in steady decline since the 1980s. At the time of the Falklands War, it was still over 5%. As the Cold War ended, spending fell below 3% in the mid-90s, ending up around 2.3% now. Today, the Prime Minister announced increasing it again would be paid for by cutting foreign aid, as we've been hearing. Back in 2013, then Prime Minister David Cameron committed to spending 0.7% of GDP, the benchmark set by the UN on aid. In 2020, Boris Johnson cut the target to 0.5%, temporarily, we were told, following the pandemic. Last year, Labour's election manifesto actually committed the party to restoring it to 0.7%, before Keir Starmer today chose to cut it to 0.3% instead.
4 years ago, Keir Starmer took a passionate stand in Parliament.
It reduces conflict, it reduces disease and people fleeing from their homes.
Guess what the Labour leader was talking about?
Investing in 0.7% in international aid is in Britain's national interest.
A policy to reduce development funding would backfire, he warned.
It is a false economy to pretend that this is some sort of cut that doesn't have consequences.
So no wonder that his decision to trump the Conservatives and slash funding for the world's poorest communities has left some charities staggered.
We are absolutely devastated at ActionAid today. We are in shock, we are in disbelief. We feel it's a very reckless decision by this government. This will directly impact women and girls living through crises, through war, through economic instability around the world.
But the critique was not just coming from those outside Parliament. Earlier, even some current Labour MPs were taken aback.
I've got to say I'm completely shocked to take from development, which is what keeps people safe in their homes, to put the money into defence seems a very, very short-sighted move to make.
The decision united this past Labour leader on the left of politics.
The wealthiest part of the world is spending less on helping the poorest people in the world and spending more on going to war.
With this former Conservative cabinet minister on the right, who argued, as Starmer once did, that development spending could bolster the country's defence.
I was astonished because I wondered what former Prime Ministers like Tony Blair or Gordon Brown or David Cameron or Theresa May would think. They had shown great commitment to this because they understood why it was so important to Britain's security and stability. I thought it was pretty shameful, actually.
The move even surprised those inside government. I'm told that some officials in the Foreign Office were not just upset about this announcement, they were angry. They thought that Keir Starmer was going to increase international development spending this year, not cut it. But the warnings are that Britain's depleted armed forces are not ready enough for war.
We as a nation need to recognise that these are very troubling times, not just for us in terms of our defence and security, but also for our Ukrainian friends fighting for their very existence.
The PM made clear that difficult domestic spending decisions will be next. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Well, we can speak to Robert now, who's already in Washington ahead of the Prime Minister's meeting with Donald Trump later this week. And Robert, there's no doubt this spending announcement was partly designed, of course, to placate the president. So is that the approach we should expect from their meeting on Thursday?
Well, I'll get on to that, but I first of all just want to stress this is a dramatic reset of Britain's relationship with developing countries. We had a view that we wanted to, in a sense, invest in them to win friends. That's been massively scaled back. We are reshaping the British economy. Keir Starmer said today that a significant proportion of this additional money for defence will go to British defence and arms manufacturing countries. And then, of course, there's this big shift towards 3% spending as a share of GDP on military by the next decade. So, this is a very big change from Labour's manifesto and a big shift in the whole approach of government to the economy and international relations. I'd say one of the biggest changes for decades. Now, there is no doubt that it has been spurred on, accelerated by this need to curry favour with Donald Trump. The Prime Minister said multiple times today he will not choose between being closer to the EU and being closer to America and Trump. He wants good relations with both. So, yes, there is very little, but there's no prospect of him criticising Donald Trump when he gets here to Washington on tomorrow for his meeting on Thursday. But he does need some important commitments from Donald Trump. On the one hand, he's desperate not to see savage tariffs imposed on the UK. He wants trade deals, he wants tech. But more important than anything else, he has said already that he's going to put British troops, boots on the ground in Ukraine if there is a peace deal to help defend Ukraine's borders. But he needs a guarantee from Trump that Americans will be there as a backstop to Britain and France and Europe to defend the security of Ukraine. And right now we've got no certainty that Donald Trump will provide that American guarantee of a security backstop.
All right, Robert, in Washington, it's going to be an interesting week for you. Thank you very much indeed. One of the barriers to peace between Ukraine and Russia could soon be overcome. There are reports that Ukraine has agreed to a revised deal with the United States on sharing its valuable minerals. President Trump and Zelensky could sign a deal in the US as soon as Friday. Dan is also in Washington tonight, where all the news seems to be happening, of course, Dan, and things have been moving pretty quickly on this one tonight. Where are we at with it all?
Yeah, that's right, Paul. So President Zelensky looks like he is coming to Washington on Friday. President Trump has been speaking in the Oval Office in the last few minutes, and he said, I hear that he's coming on Friday. It's certainly OK with me if he'd like to. So not exactly confirmation definitively that is going to happen, but it appears that he is going to be here to sign off this rare minerals deal. Essentially, this is a better version of the deal than the one that was put to the Ukrainians a few days ago, which President Zelensky rejected, saying it would take 10 generations of Ukrainians to repay. This one, we haven't got the full terms of it, but it essentially establishes a sort of fund. 50% of Ukraine's mineral wealth would be paid into it, and then American firms would be able to invest in Ukraine to get at those minerals. The big question is whether it comes with security guarantees attached. I don't think that's been answered yet, and that was something that the Ukrainians certainly wanted. But this may be the key to opening up a wider deal with Russia to end the war. Here's what President Trump said about the minerals deal in the last few minutes.
It's a very big deal. Look, it could be $1 trillion deal, it could be whatever, but it's rare earths and other things. And look, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on Ukraine and Russia fighting a war that should have never, ever happened.
Ukraine has about 5% of the world's rare earth minerals, and other things like graphite and titanium and lithium, which are all vital in the kind of 21st century economy. So it really feels like there is building momentum towards some sort of deal being done, certainly on minerals first.